Hey, just a heads up that the following content may be disturbing or triggering for some listeners and is not appropriate for children. Please take care of yourself and others who may be listening with you. Welcome to the Bonus Babies Podcast, a show that has no easy answers, only hard questions.
I can only imagine what comes next, and what comes next is probably me not being here. And I was told that often, we'll kill you. You say this to somebody, we'll kill you. So I was happy when I got put into foster care. I wasn't happy about the scenario. I wasn't happy about how things unfolded, but I've known tons of people in the 30 years of doing this work and me sharing my story all the time. People who said, man, I hated foster care. Foster care is a nightmare. It's the worst. It's this. It shouldn't exist. And I've always said, for some of us, the fact that this system exists is a lifesaver, because while I understand for some people, they shouldn't be involved in this system. They shouldn't have become stuck in this system. My family needed intervention at this level. And my family needed intervention at this level long before we got it. I think we were hidden because we had money. I think that we got away with a lot because we lived in an area that they didn't frequent. People weren't looking for families like ours in our neighborhood. I went to private school. My private school was more concerned with, is the tuition check here?
Can you tell me what you call the kids who you've cared for over the years?
We feel that the children that we receive coming into our home are bonuses. So we call them bonus babies.
I love that. This is your host, Jayne Amelia Larson, and I'm a CASA, a court-appointed special advocate volunteer for youth in foster care. Yeah, I know it's a mouthful. In the same way a CASA works, I explore all things in the foster care maze by talking to kids, parents, caregivers, attorneys, social workers, therapists, really anybody and everybody who will speak to me to keep the conversation open and the information flowing about all things CASA.
Hi, this is Jake Eberly, the producer of the Bonus Babies podcast, and today Jayne Amelia speaks with Jenny Serrano. Jenny was born to a teenage runaway mom in Los Angeles, California. Her biological dad disappeared when she was really little, but her stepdad arrived quickly after that. Life was good for a while until things got hectic and she ended up in foster care. After a long journey, she's become a drug and alcohol counselor, then became a manager at Children's Court, a professor, and an administrator at the Department of Children and Family Services. There's a lot more, but she'll have to give you the details. Here's Jenny Serrano.
Hello. I'm here with Jenny Serrano. Hey, Jenny.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm good, and I got you on the podcast. I can't believe it.
Yes, it's been a long time coming, but I'm really excited to be here with you.
Yeah, it took a little while, and thank you so much for your patience, and thank you for not letting me drive you crazy with reach outs, which is kind of what's happened a little bit. Like, hey, we want to do it? Want to do it? So, Jenny, tell me a little bit about who you are, where you're from, how you were raised, and let's get into that.
All right. Wow, that's a big question. I'm 48 years old this year.
Get out. No, come on.
Yeah.
No way.
I'll actually be 49 by the end of the year. But right now I'm 48. I'm born and raised here in Los Angeles. I was born to a teenage mom who was a runaway, who also had a foster care experience. Her mother died when she was an infant, and she was raised in foster care and then adopted out of the system. And that was in the state of Colorado. She ran away when she was 17, came out here to visit some siblings.
Right. So was it a happy adoption, or was it just an adoption just to check off?
I don't really know. I think that over time, the way she expressed it to us, it wasn't as happy as I think she would have liked it to be. I think there was a lot of control and some physical discipline that might have gone a little too far with her adoptive family. A lot of religious, she was in a religious upbringing that was really strict. So, she rebelled and she left when she was 17 and came to Los Angeles to visit her siblings who were already here.
So they were separated when
she didn't really know any of her siblings. She wasn't raised with them. They were all separated, and there were age gaps. The siblings that were here were 10 and 12 years older than her. So she came out here at their invitation after she finished the 11th grade and just never went back. She stayed
Right.
here. She met my
Right.
dad. And then, I was born. So here I am.
Right. So she was 17 or 18 when you were born?
Yeah, she was 17. And I feel like we grew up together in a lot of ways. In hindsight, like now as an adult, when I think of how old she was at different points in my life, I realize, oh my gosh, she was so young, and yeah, I don't know, that age and these years gives me some different context than I think I had, of course, as a youngster.
Yeah, it's interesting as you get older and you start to understand what perhaps your parents have been through and maybe even forgive them with, realizing that, wow, if this is what it was like, no wonder they didn't know how to handle things or didn't always do, I don't want to say the right thing, but, when you're growing up and you have to, like, she's 17 years old, she has a baby herself, right? And did she have any help at all? Was she on her own or?
She had her siblings, but I don't think they were that helpful. So, she really, because she didn't really know them, she didn't have a relationship like that with them. She ended up meeting my stepdad. My bio dad very quickly left the scene. And my stepdad came into the scene when I was 11 months old. They quickly began living together. They ended up getting married. A few years later, they had my little brother. And so my stepdad, for all intents and purposes, was my dad. That's who I've always referred to as my dad. He's the only person that I've ever known who acted in that role. He was very together. He was older than her. He was 10 years older than her. He owned property. He had already been to Vietnam. He had already gone to college. He was a professional. So she, I think, was very fortunate to meet him in some ways because all of that basic sort of need stuff was tended to, right? It was taken care of by him. But emotionally and in terms of their bandwidth, I think both of them were really lacking. They had both grown up in really chaotic environments, environments that weren't very stable or loving or, anything that gave them the capacity to be able to parent well once they became parents. So they were both hampered by that. There was, it was a domestic violence relationship between the two of them. They were, very physically volatile, verbally volatile with one another, and that spilled over to us. And so, yeah, my house was always chaotic. My mom had disclosed to me even as a kid that she was drinking and doing drugs, with my stepdad. She was doing that even before I was born. And then she continued to do that. They were, party folks. It was the 70s. And so, they threw really great parties and they had all the things that people wanted to party with. So it just got out of control. And I think, again, because of the other things that they might have been lacking, it was a form of escapism for them. And then it just got really complicated. You mentioned being able to forgive. And I recently, restarted therapy. I've been in and out of therapy since I was like 7 years old. But we started off on that note where I said, I never was really angry at my mom or my dad. I really think I understood even as a kid, it was very obvious that there was a capacity issue, that their bandwidth was really limited. And even though I had a lot of feelings about, what was going on in the house and then when I went into foster care and what happened during those years and after that, I don't think I was ever really mad at them. I think I understood they were both in a lot of pain. It was very visible to me, even as a kid, that they were struggling, with a lot of stuff.
That's
From
tough for a kid to see, though.
Oh yeah,
Even if you clocked it, and even if you kind of understood it, that's kind of hard to take in.
oh yeah. I didn't always know what to do with it. My dad and I refer to my stepdad as my dad, so I don't want to confuse your listeners, but my dad, had a lot of lingering stuff from Vietnam too. So he would ask us some really difficult questions about, how we perceived of things that he had to engage in. And, he just grappled with it. He struggled with that a lot. He had PTSD, which I think at the time we didn't really have
No, it
language
wasn't really
for.
addressed. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Again, it was just so evident. It was so there right on the surface that there was so much pain and confusion. And then, I don't think we really knew how to interpret it, but we learned very quickly how to navigate within it. We
Ah,
had to
yes, I'm
figure out,
sure. Yeah.
how do I not set this off?
Right.
How do I keep myself safe? How do I keep, for me as the older sibling, how do I keep my brother safe? How do I make sure that my dad doesn't get mad at my mom? So I was very parentified. Now I have the language for it. And I just learned how to navigate within it. I was really, I think, the adult. I was really the parent the majority of the time in my house.
Right. Have you checked off your aces?
Yeah.
Yeah. How many do you have?
9 or 10, depending on how you ask the question.
I figured maybe. Yeah.
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 So a solid 9
Solid 9.
Yeah, in every instance. And then there's one question that if you ask it a certain way, I might have that one too, and then it's a 10. And I remember when I first did ACEs, probably a decade ago, I called Zaid and I said, "Hey, I got a 9," and he was like, "You're not supposed to be happy about that. Like, that's
No,
not
you're
good,
not
Jenny."
supposed to have more than 3.
And I teach it. I teach about it now. I've taught about it, at my job. I teach it in my classroom with my students, and actually learning about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, has been phenomenal because it gives me so much more to work with. And I'm, a huge fan of like learning about brain science and all of the stuff that we haven't really known, but we're starting to get to learn and know today. What are the impacts of experiences like that on a kid's actual physical development, cognitive development? At this point, we know a little bit more about what it does to us emotionally, right? But even that's relatively new. So
Right. So I've talked about ACEs a little bit on the podcast, but can you give us a little, like, 1 or 2 sentence briefer on it? Because
Yeah.
obviously you're an expert.
I don't know if I'm an expert, but adverse childhood experiences, the way we've implemented it, it's essentially a survey that we can use as a tool to determine how much exposure to trauma or experiences that would impact a child long into adulthood, how much they've had that exposure. And so it's a 10-question survey. It was developed in 1993 out of Kaiser in San Diego by a physician who was trying to work with clients in an obesity clinic who just were not making progress towards their goals. And so he partnered with the CDC and they created this survey. They surveyed, I think, 17,000 people and found that a huge number of them, a huge percentage of them, had at least one ACE, at least one adverse childhood experience. Now we use it to just kind of inform all kinds of different things. And I think the research that folks have done over this past 30 plus years on it has really elevated some new things around, what are the health implications long term for people with higher ACE scores. Typically, they use the barometer of like 4 or more on the scale of 0 to 10.
Right. I'm a solid 8, by the way. I think.
All right.
Yeah,
You're my
yeah.
sis. Welcome to the high zone.
Yep. Yeah, for
you know,
sure.
like one of the things that always jumps out to me is that we have a lifespan that can be reduced by 19 years. That's really significant. And,
Wow.
And that's even factoring in not having a lifestyle that sort of promotes that lessened lifespan. So you're not smoking, you're not doing drugs, you're not drinking, you're not engaging in other high risk behaviors. And yet, and still, you could potentially have a reduced lifespan of almost 20 years. And I think about that often now because I am approaching 49 and I'm thinking, shoot, that's scary. That's, it's definitely something to think about. And I think about it a lot. I've outlived my parents. My parents died much younger than I am now. So granted, they had different lifestyles, right? But I think, wow, even the implications of having been exposed to the way they had their life set up, could potentially lead to my life being shortened. And I just think that's significant. It's a crisis, I think, of epic proportions that people aren't really talking about. And so we can turn that around. We can make a lot of changes and really help one another be able to recover if we already have these super high scores or even a 2 or 3, right? People should have none. For all the little kids that are coming behind us, I think there's a lot that we can do to support parents. And so that's that. There's a lot more that can be said on it, but I'll stop there on that.
So how did you end up in care?
Yeah, so I was about 13. I actually don't really know what the precipitating like factor was or cause, like what happened that day.
Right. So you don't remember cops coming to the house because
I do remember that, yeah, but I don't know what set that into motion. Yeah, so again, I had been living in a house that was super chaotic, rampant with, drugs, alcohol. I think over time I realized probably around the time I was maybe 11 or so that things were getting out of hand. Our house had been broken into by drug dealers a couple of times. My mom ended up getting shot over owing someone money. There were it was just getting a little wilder than it had in the past. And also the physical abuse began being much more volatile towards me because I was physically getting bigger, right? I was approaching being a teenager. I was taller than my mom.
right. So what was happening to you?
You name it, physical abuse, punched in the face, choked, thrown around the room, having objects thrown at me, kicked, just hair yanked, anything that you could imagine, being bitten, being scratched, just constant every day. I can't think of a day that didn't happen. And then if my mom needed money, taking our items, whatever we might have, my dad was the kind of person that would lavish you with gifts after an incident. So if something really, outlandish had happened, we would be gifted with, diamond rings and super nice earrings and all kinds of different stuff, technology, whatever it was. And then when my mom needed money, that's what she went for. So,
Wow.
there was a lot of, again, just like physical volatility in the house. My brother and I also fought pretty viciously because we were mimicking what we were seeing. And I received it from both. And both of my parents were aggressors in the domestic violence like scenario between them. They were both aggressors. It wasn't my dad, always doing this to my mom. Sometimes my mom was the person that initiated it. And also initiated with us. I wasn't only physically abused by my dad, I was also physically abused by my mom. Obviously the level that she was able to hurt us was different, but with my dad, she was super volatile. She'd break table legs off tables and hit him with that. Or, it was wild. They really went after each other. And my dad was a Vietnam vet, so you could fill in the blanks, right? We had guns in the house, we had, stuff in the house that you could threaten people with and make people really scared. So I grew up, I think, in a constant state of terror.
Right. Have you ever wondered now as an adult, like, are you like surprised you survived it?
Yeah, I think that's how I know that, a higher power exists. There was some reason that I did survive it. There was something also in the ether that protected me and that allowed me to be able to continue to move forward and do the things that I've done with my own life, right? Like there has to be some reason why. And I know the reason why. The reason why was to do the stuff that I'm doing in my life, in my work and in my own personal life. But I think I was definitely surprised.
Yeah. I mean, I think if I were you, I'd be like, wow, I can't believe I made it out.
Even like as a young adolescent, I really thought that I would probably be killed there. The volatility was increasing, right? The level of severity of the beatings and stuff.
Okay, hold just 1 second. So I've never ever heard anybody say that. Like you said, you just figured you would be
Yeah,
killed. Like that looked like the most
absolutely.
likely end result.
Yeah. Because again, it had started to increase as I got older and as my parents fell deeper and deeper into their choices, I guess. Like some of the instability was starting to creep in. My dad was suspended from work because they caught him using drugs at work. And so, that was a huge threat to our way of life. My mom never worked. My mom, didn't have more than a high school education. So everything financial was on my dad. And we lived very well. My dad was a professional. My dad was a structural engineer. So we lived very well.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that's a cool job.
When he got caught at work, that put everything, at risk. And so he started pulling out guns, making threats to kill me. The physical abuse became more and more severe. The isolation that we had experienced throughout my childhood became even more intense. We stopped even going to school at times to stay home because maybe we were, bruised or had cuts. When I would go to school, I was so emotionally just a wreck. I mean, I couldn't function at all when I was in school. I would basically ditch classes and go sit in the library, just try to escape through reading, which was always my solace. That was my salvation. Was I was a voracious reader, and I would just go to the library and I would just read. But yeah, it had become so unpredictable, so scary, and just at a different level where, I started having to buy drugs for my mom. My mom would take me along when she was making her purchases, and people would say no, thank God. Like, hey, no, I don't want your kid. And so at that point, I knew this is way worse than it's ever been. And I don't know. I can only imagine what comes next. And what comes next is probably me not being here. And I was told that often, we'll kill you. You say this to somebody, we'll kill you. So I was happy when when I got put into foster care. I wasn't happy about the scenario. I wasn't happy about how things unfolded, but I've known tons of people in the 30 years of doing this work and me sharing my story all the time. People who said, man, I hated foster care. Foster care is a nightmare. It's the worst. It's this. It shouldn't exist. And I've always said, for some of us, the fact that this system exists is a lifesaver, because while I understand for some people they shouldn't be involved in this system, they shouldn't have become stuck in this system. My family needed intervention at this level. And my family needed intervention at this level long before we got it. I think we were hidden because we had money. I think that we got away with a lot because we lived in an area that they didn't frequent. People weren't looking for families like ours in our neighborhood. I went to private school. My private school was more concerned with, is the tuition check here?
So what happened when you were removed?
Police came to the house, and I remember I had bad grades, that report card, and I had expressed to a counselor that I was afraid to go home. And that counselor, I guess, must have called Child Protective Services or the police, but they let me go home. So I went home, and I was at home with my parents, and the police came and knocked on the door and said, hey, we're here with DCFS, right? The Department of Children and Family Services, and we're coming to remove these children. So they put my brother and I in the back seat of a police car, and we sat there. It was the first time I ever saw my dad really cry and like beg. I remember he wrapped himself around the legs of the police officer and said, please don't take my kids. And that was huge for us. We were, my dad, again, Vietnam vet, really, muscular guy, fitness, like sort of outdoor guy, even though he did drugs. He was a man's man. So to see him buckle to his knees and wrap himself around another man and cry was a lot for us to take in. And so we thought we were getting arrested, my brother and I always share that because, no one really talked to us and we didn't really know what was going on. We sat in a police car.
Right. And you're sitting in the back of the police car,
And we sat outside the police station for a while until, whatever investigator or whatever was assigned to us came and started the process. But my brother and I were separated that night. And again, as I expressed in the beginning, I have a different father. And so he is my half sibling, although we have the same mom and we were never raised in that way to say, oh, that's my half sibling. So I didn't really understand that would play into placement and case planning and all of that stuff at that time. And we're talking about in the 1990s, right? 89 to 95 is when I was in care. So, it did. They said, oh, well, he'll get placed with his family. And I was like, well, his family is my family, but they weren't my blood family. And so he was placed with his relatives and I was placed, with strangers. And that's how that happened. Over time, we had a couple of placements. We had 2 placements where we were together with relatives. And those were, although short-lived, they were really wonderful times because we weren't alone. We were together. We were very close because we had grown up in that house together, But yeah, I was in care for 6 years. I moved around a lot. I think I made a lot of caregivers uncomfortable. I wasn't outwardly demonstrative, like in terms of like my behavior. I was really sullen. I was really quiet. I was very withdrawn. Now when we teach and we talk about, being in fight or flight mode, I lived in freeze mode. I was frozen and terrified, I think, most of the time because I knew, I'm out here by myself. Like, yeah, I'm a ward of the court and I know I have parents out in the world, but like, I really think, I'm 14, I'm 15, I'm 16. I'm really out here in the world by myself. And that was terrifying to me. But I knew, right, I have to just keep moving ahead.
So there was never a chance that you would be reunified with your folks?
No, because my mom really didn't express great interest in complying with a case plan. And because at the time, the way policy was set up, or perhaps state or federal law, I'm not sure, I couldn't be reunified with my stepfather. Today, that's different. Today, we could have done that. That absolutely could have been the plan, to reunify me with my stepdad. But at that time, it was not.
Right, because he wasn't your blood, or maybe because he hadn't adopted you officially?
Yeah, so I was
Just,
placed
yeah.
into what they then called long-term foster care. And the plan from day one was that I would age out of care at 18.
From day one, that was the plan. Wow.
Yeah, pretty much. Because again, my parents really weren't very compliant, right? Even if my stepdad complied, that was for the purposes of reunifying with my brother, which he did. After a couple of years, he was able to get my brother back. And I talk about this, I've talked about this a lot publicly. For my mom, what I was able to gather as an adult, she died when I was a very young adult, but what she told me was, she said, these women made a decision. These educated professional women told me that I wasn't a good mom and that I shouldn't be parenting. And so I did you a favor by just leaving you there because they can take care of you. I bring that up when I speak and when I teach because I need people to understand the power dynamic that social workers have. I always say it doesn't matter how much you get paid or how high your credentials or placement, is within the bureaucracy. You have a lot of power. You are taking people's kids away, and people who are experiencing these kinds of things in their life that lead them to come in front of us as child protective services, they're going to defer to you a lot of times, right? They're afraid. They're under duress. They're being threatened, even when you're nice, even when
you're nice. I think that's really true. Like, you can be very, very fair and sweet, and still you have all the power.
So
if you're taking my kids away, you have all the power.
I think for my mom, this judgment had been made, and I think she believed it. I think my mom was very well aware that her bandwidth was very limited. She knew her circumstances growing up, and she knew what we had experienced in that house. So she just resigned herself to, letting whatever happened to me happen. And maybe that was a better alternative, right? So I never got visits when I was in care. I saw my stepdad occasionally when I would go to court because, my case, of course, was still joined with my brother's. So I would get to see my brother when we would go to court. But we didn't have visitation. I didn't have anybody come check on me when I was in care. And I think that was pretty impactful for me because, again, it really cemented the idea, like, hey man, you're on your own, like there's nobody looking out for you.
Yeah, there's nobody looking out for me. Like, no one even asking how I am, where I am right now.
I recently got a picture, maybe about a year ago, on Ancestry. I didn't realize Ancestry would take yearbook photos, and it was sent to me. It was sent to me as something in the account. And I was like, oh my gosh, here's a picture of me when I was in 11th grade. And I posted it on social media, and people said, oh, wow, people should have been taking pictures of you left and right. And I was like, you know what? I don't have any pictures of myself between the time that I entered foster care and when I left. That was the only picture that I have. And to me, that's also indicative of, like, there wasn't anybody there who was trying to document anything, or there really wasn't anything that I probably wanted documented, because again, I moved around a lot. I was really unstable in care for, I think, a couple of different reasons, but nothing too major. Just being an adolescent, being, really emotionally damaged. And I don't know. I think I made caregivers uncomfortable. That's all I'm going to say. I think they were like, she's really quiet and she's just very withdrawn, and what am I supposed to do with her?
Right. Was there ever a home that you felt wanted in?
Oh, yeah.
Or cared
absolutely.
for or loved?
And that's why I'm sitting here.
Oh, okay, good.
My aunt's home. So I lived with my maternal aunt, my mom's half-sister, the one who invited her to come to LA to visit. And she had never met her. She had met her once, I think, in Colorado. And so she took us for about 18 months, me and my brother. So that was one of our placements where we were together. I was 15, almost 16. So I was 15 and 16 when I lived with her. And she was phenomenal. She was amazing. She's the reason I'm sitting here. She had no idea what to do with us. She didn't know what was going on in that house. She said she knew that there was stuff happening, but again, the nature of that kind of abuse and relationship violence and substance use is so isolating. We were off the radar. We didn't have visits. She didn't come over. She did when we were younger, and then there were years where we didn't see her and where she would have no idea what was going on. And so when she got us, she was like, I don't know what to do with you. You guys are really struggling. I was struggling in school. I was struggling emotionally. I had night terrors. I couldn't sleep through the night. I didn't know how to interact with people at all. I just was a mess. I was a bundle of nerves. I was developing ulcers. I would bite my nails to the quick. I was just a anxious, kind of depressed mess of a kid. And so was my brother. He just maybe processed it a little bit differently. But she said, I'm going to throw my hands up. I don't know what the hell to do with you guys, but I'm going to take you to therapy. And so, we had Kaiser. I had Kaiser through my dad's employment. He had to maintain that. And also my dad had to pay for us to be in foster care. Even though the plan was never for me to reunify with him, he still had to make payments every month, right? I think some people overlook that some parents are actually paying the county to keep their kids in care and keep their private insurance intact. And so we were lucky that we had Kaiser, and we lived in the chemical dependency therapy program. Like, that's where we were. My parents had been in and out of that program my whole life. So I was very familiar with how it worked. But she put us in seriously intensive programming. We had therapy individually, together as siblings, together collectively as a whole family. She had a son who's about the same age. My cousin's about the same age as us. And so we did group therapy. We did everything. And we were there 3-4 times a week. I mean, we would ride the bus after school. She would come from downtown. She also worked for the county for 42 years before she retired. She was an attorney. But she would pack our dinner and take it to work with her and then bring it after work to Kaiser. And we would already be engaged in our therapy. And, she'd set it out on the table and be like, hey, we're eating dinner here.
Wow, what a strange strange
it
dinner
was,
table,
but,
huh?
We needed that. We needed that level of intensive intervention. That, to me, is what changed my life. It just impacted me in a different way. It gave me different tools. I felt seen. I felt heard. I felt safe. And she was part of that. She taught us and had to break through a lot of stuff, all the stuff that we had experienced. She'd try to hug us, and in the beginning, she'd say, man, you guys would jump from one side of the room to the other. You didn't expect touch that wasn't painful, right? She would give us butterfly kisses. She tried to tuck us in at night. And for probably the first 6 months or more, we were like, what are you doing? We had never experienced that, being tucked in at night or being kissed or being held or being hugged or anything like that. We really didn't. My parents weren't demonstrative in that way. So I had never really experienced that. And so she gave me all of those things, and that was a life changer for me because I had never had that. So she changed my life. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
she changed
grateful
your
for her.
life. So did you learn from her how to be a good mom? Because I know you're a really good mom.
Some
Well, I
days.
mean, I think so.
I have really.
I've met your daughter and your son. They're pretty
Thank you.
fabulous. So
Yeah, they're pretty great. I think they were already pretty great when they got here.
you don't take any credit?
It's hard to. I'm going to be honest. I think, this is where I get emotional. I just try my best. Sometimes my best isn't good enough, and sometimes it is. My kids are everything to me. Anybody that knows me, my daughter saved my life. I was very lost when she came along, and so she gave a lot of direction, a lot of purpose, because I knew, I didn't want to have a third generation of my family in foster care, and I knew that, I wanted to just give her like all the things that I didn't have, not monetarily, but to be there, to have somebody there, to have somebody want you and love you and cherish you, and protect you, keep you safe. So those things were really what I focused on. I don't know. I think some of the things I learned from my aunt, I think most of the things I learned from my kids as I was going through it.
Have you ever told them that,
I tell
Jenny?
them that all the time,
Good.
and I always have been very open about my limitations, right? Like when my daughter turned 12, and my kids now, for people that don't know me, my daughter's 26 and my son is 18.
Right, and you had her young. Right, you had your children young. You were.
Yeah, I was 22, 22, 23 years old when I had my
Mm-hmm.
daughter, and 29 when I had my
Mm-hmm.
son. When she turned 12, it was really a big deal because that was the age that I was when I was removed. And so I was like, oh man, any ideas of a blueprint that I may have had before this, I really don't have going forward. Because by the time I was that age, I had already been parenting myself, but then I really was on my own. And I didn't have caregivers aside from my aunt for that limited 18 months out of the 6 years who, even cared about where I was. Like I didn't have caregivers who were very plugged in, unfortunately. So I really parented myself. I always think that. I was at a loss. Like I had to read books, I had to find mentors. And I've been so fortunate that I've just met through life people that I looked up to, people who parented in ways that I thought were great and that I could learn from and that I could ask questions of, and whose kids were maybe a little bit older than mine. And I'm super grateful again, anybody that knows me knows this, for Charisse, my best friend Charisse, who I met when I was 17 when we were in foster care. She had a baby at the same time. They're 2 weeks apart, not planned, but I also think maybe planned by a higher power,
Yeah.
because we were able to really learn from each other and to support each other. And of course, I had my daughter's dad. He was there for the first like 13 years, and he was super helpful in that he was physically there. He was able to help bear the burden of it. But I think, both of us were lacking. Like attracts like. His family wasn't, super stable either. He didn't have the best upbringing either. So a lot of what we did was sort of in defiance of what we knew, right? I won't do this the way my parents did it. And then I think probably by the time my son came and my daughter was about 8 or so, I was like, that's not the approach. That's not what I need to do. I don't need to worry about not being like my parents. I really felt like I wanted to bring the positives from my parents in, because at that point, when I looked in the mirror, I was like, I like myself. I think I'm pretty great.
Wow, that's a really good realization. You're like, I'm doing okay.
Yeah, I was like, I'm resilient, and I went through some shit,
Wow.
but I'm here, and I do like who I am and who I've become, and part of that is because of the sides of my parents that were wonderful. I'm a voracious reader because my mom was a voracious reader and introduced books to me. I was articulate and friendly and a person that talks to everybody because that's what my dad was. There were just things about them that I wanted my kids to know, even though they didn't know them at all. They had already been passed away. I thought, I don't want them to just know that side of it. They're going to hear that because of my job and because of the public speaking I do and, just being around me. They'll hear what the negatives are. But I also want them to hear the positives because they carry those traits too. My daughter sounds just like me and I sound just like my mom. My parents were very culturally astute. And so there was a lot of that I wanted to give to my kids and took for them to know where that came from. And so I think I really sort of switched up the template and said, it's not about not wanting to be like them. It's wanting to be like me and wanting to lift up those things that I loved about my parents, because I loved my parents. For all their shortcomings and anything that happened, I still loved them fiercely, still to this day. So what can I lift up? While, of course, acknowledging people are complex. And that's what I've always imparted to my kids. People are multi-layered. We're all complex. There's good in us. There's bad in us. You have to just take what you need, and use it to create what you want for yourself.
Right. So did education help you with that? Because you have been really fierce about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. You just got into it and you kept on
I
going.
love school. I didn't like high school. I didn't like K through 12. Let's be clear. So compulsory education was not my thing. But college was everything for me. It's much more self-directed, right? You're studying things that you like. And for the first time ever, I had people that I looked up to who said, "Hey kid, you're smart. You can do some stuff. You can be whatever you want to be. You have these great skills, you have these talents. Let's lean into those." And so school was super important for me. And I started off, at the very bottom. I left high school by taking the California High School Proficiency exam. So I left high school at the start of my 12th grade year. At the time, there really weren't articulation agreements between school districts, and I moved around so much that even though I had even been in honors courses, those credits didn't follow me. And so I was operating at a deficit all the time. And I thought, I'm tired of this. I want to be done with school. I want to be done with high school. And so I took the test. I passed it my first go round, and I was done with high school. And then I went into community college. I started community college, though, when I was living in a homeless shelter. So I had turned, 18 a few months after I took the test, and I was living on buses. I was sleeping at friends' houses, people who would let me in and, be quiet so my parents don't hear. You can sleep in my closet or, things like that. And I ended up in a shelter, which was great. It wasn't great, but I was happy to be sheltered.
Right. At least it was something, right?
That I could anchor myself with.
Yeah.
I remember I showed up on December 24th on Christmas Eve. And by January 2nd, when all the staff came back, I was like, where do I go to sign up for school? Like, I need to go to school. And they were like, what? But, I had the experience of watching my dad, seeing his degrees on the wall, knowing what education would get me. I knew that I was smart. I just, wasn't sure what that would do for me. And they said, if there's a community college down the street, why don't you go there? So I showed up at Los Angeles City College and started going to school. And I just didn't stop. I transferred. I ended up, getting my undergrad and graduate degree at Cal State Northridge. And I stayed, I think, as long as I did because people gave me great feedback and they really seemed to care about me. They knew me, they knew my strengths, they knew my weaknesses. They advised me. I picked my majors based on what professors told me to pick. And I trusted those people, and they didn't steer me wrong. I was given great opportunities, to do other things. And I left grad school and went into a teacher training program because they said, all your presentations are great. You can command an audience. Why don't you become a professor? I said, okay, great. Let me do that. Right. Like, I had no idea what I was doing. I really, just relied on these people that I held in great esteem. And so,
But also you did it all on your own. I mean, like you did it all on your own. Thank goodness there were people helping you, steering you, directing you. But this is all while your living situation was still super unstable.
I was really committed to my education. I knew that was the thing that I could count on, that no one could take from me, that would have the potential to change the trajectory of my life. I stayed in the homeless shelter for 6 months and I got 2 part-time jobs. I was going to school full time. There were times where I walked to school because I didn't have enough bus tokens. But I just knew this is the only thing that I have that, if I do it right and I take it as far as I can, potentially my life will be impacted positively for it. So I was committed to it. And to me, that was the commitment to myself. I was looking for something that was bigger than me. And that's where I got the validation. That's where people saw me and valued me. And I hadn't had that experience before that. So it wasn't always hard. I won't say like, I had a tough time in school. School was kind of easy, right? And I picked majors that complemented what I knew how to do, right? It was like public administration. You want me to write some papers and talk? That's what I do. I love that. I can do that. I knew that I wanted a career in some kind of advocacy, at a macro level, right? That I wanted to do systems change kind of work. I knew that because I already had jobs doing micro stuff, working directly with clients. And I was like, this isn't for me. This isn't me. Because emotionally, I knew I didn't have the bandwidth. I was like, I'm kind of an emotional wreck on the inside, and people are sort of activating things in me as I'm helping them. And I can't have that. I need to be much more focused and much less emotional for me to take care of my own kid and for me to be able to function every day. So even that, a lot of people, will say, oh, wow, well, you decided to do this. And wow, no, I did that out of survival, right? I knew I can't do that. I can't be a social worker on the ground working with clients. I don't have that bandwidth. But what I can do is I can develop programs. You need somebody to write a grant for you. You need somebody to envision, how to, fill in the gap. I can do that. You need somebody to go and talk and advocate for some kind of legislative change. I can do that. So that's where I found my niche. And I always think that's the thing that we have to do is like help people find what you're good at. So the lift isn't as heavy, right? Because it's what you innately possess. I think all the things that I do for money, in terms of my career are things that that's just who I am, right?
Right, right. You're
Yeah.
using your strengths, and then you're also
Yeah,
building on your
absolutely.
strengths. So there have been many people who've helped you, I know. But there's one person that you mentioned, a DCFS coordinator. Can you
Yeah.
tell me about that?
There's actually two people that were about the same time. So yeah, but the one you're talking about that I know I've talked about around you is Jules Gabay. So shout out to him. Yeah, he was an IOP
Yay!
coordinator, an independent living program coordinator at the Department of Children and Family Services. And I was a thorny kid, right? Like I was a kid that knew how to advocate for myself. So I remember going in and I had a different coordinator assigned to me, and he was not very responsive. And I was like, look, I'm in school, I'm working, I'm doing all this stuff. I need a bus pass. I need to know like what I can access. I need these things, right? Whatever it was, clothing, food assistance, whatever I could get. And I wasn't shy about asking. And I wasn't shy about telling people my story and my scenario. So I was at the financial aid office at school, like, hi, I have $5. I was in foster care. Help me, right? Give me some money. I'm here at school. I'm a great student. What can I get? I was that kid. Right, wrong, indifferent. I had to do what I needed to do to survive, right? Sometimes we call those kids manipulators. I was surviving, right? I was figuring out a way to be able to actually exist. And so with him, I knew I had hit a wall. He wasn't interested in really being forthcoming about what I could access, and he didn't like my style. And I was like, that's fine. I'm not for everybody.
But why did he even have that job though? If
You
he
got
wasn't
me.
interested
Yeah,
in,
I
I
don't
mean,
I don't know. Again, I think sometimes people like the idea of being a gatekeeper. I encounter that even today, right? Like in this profession. I think some people like holding all the cards and they want to dole them out as they see fit. Yeah,
yeah, it gives him power. It makes him feel
absolutely.
powerful
And
and
so,
important.
so he was no good. So I asked, "Who's your boss?" Because I needed to talk to that person. And he was like,
Who's your
"I hate this
boss?
kid," right? So I talked to whoever the boss was at the time, and they assigned me to Jules. And Jules was like, "Come on in. What do you need?" And I told him, "Hey, this is what I'm doing." And he was like, "Kid, you're phenomenal, right? You are amazing. What can I help you with? What do you need? What can I give you?" And he was amazing. He just cued in on things that were really important to me and super impactful to me. So like at the shelter, we had to pay for everything. We it was not free. We paid rent. It was $200 a month to live in the homeless shelter. We had to get our own food. We had to pay for our own laundry with machines that were in the house. You had to pay for them. So everything, was expensive for somebody who was just trying to get on their feet and who has
Or who
nothing.
has
Yeah, I
nothing,
had
right? Yeah,
literally I walked
yeah.
into the shelter with the clothes that I had on my back and a backpack. And I remember sleeping on my bed with no sheets, no blankets, no nothing. I had to figure out a way to get that stuff. So one of the things that he did was he walked around with a pocket full of quarters. And so when he would come and visit, he would say, "Oh, you know what? I happen to have a lot of extra quarters. Do you need that for your laundry?" And that would help me wash my clothes for the week. I can never stress how important that was, because for me, all my clothes were from Goodwill. Everything was secondhand. Everything was $1 or less, because that's all I could afford for years, for several years while I was in school and working multiple part-time jobs. When you are living like that, the only thing you can do is be clean, right? Nothing's new, but the one thing I can do is I can make sure that this stuff smells good, looks good. I'm going to iron it. I'm going to make sure when I show up in the world, no one can tell that I'm experiencing what I'm experiencing. And so for him to do that gave me dignity. It was a recognition of my humanity and the things that I should be able to have. We forget about those things. You forget about it when you are working with a population experiencing homelessness, that they need a shower, that they need clean clothing. I think we've come a long way, but at the time, I don't think people really paid attention to that. And so for me, he wasn't just giving me quarters. He was giving me back my humanity. He was recognizing that, this very important part of me being able to show up in the world and not be seen as less than was also important to him. And so for that, I'm eternally grateful, because that's everything to me. He didn't have to do anything else, but he did everything else. He referred me for scholarships. He answered the phone every time I called, even when it was after hours, because I was going through some teenage crisis or another. He put me in for everything, for all the things that I needed, for bus passes every month, for tuition, for books and supplies. Oh, hey, they're giving away backpacks. Come and pick one up. Hey, they're going to do a job fair. Come and get a job. He always looked out for me. And for that, I'm forever grateful.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Jules. Man, he just sounds like, wow, I wish there were like thousands
Yes,
of
I
him.
wish every kid leaving care had a Jules. He had to love that job. And I feel like he loved all his kids. He was a person that I continued to call even as an adult to say, hey, Jules, I'm graduating from college. Hey, Jules, I got a job. I got a real professional job with benefits and salary. And he would always be there to answer and cheer me on. And I see that, like, in doing the work. I have had the pleasure of working alongside coordinators and social workers who go to weddings, who are there at baby showers for their kids, the kids that they were there for, that they showed up for in that same way that Jules did for me. And so hats off and so much love to all of those people that do this work and really do this work, not for themselves. We always say social workers are not in it for the income, we're in it for the outcome, right?
So who was the other person?
There was
you were
another.
going to mention somebody else.
Actually, there were a lot of other people. I'll just shout them out. Lindsay Stewart, rest in peace, because he just recently passed. Who was phenomenal, from the Community College Foundation. Shoot, Vinny D'Averso's another one, and I get to work alongside him, from time to time, and we always joke, like, he's known me since I was a kid. He did my life skills classes. Just people that just, again, saw me for who I was and were like, kid, you got something special. That's all I needed, was just for someone to see me. And it's a pleasure to have been able to work alongside these folks as I, charted my professional career.
Right. So tell me about that.
So I've been an administrator with the Department of Children and Family Services for the past 15 years in July. And I've been with the county for 17 years. Prior to that, I was in the chief executive office. But I've spent, the whole of my career in child welfare in some way or another. So I started off working with transition age youth that were homeless, experiencing homelessness, way back in the day at Covenant House, California, working in their transitional housing program and learning the ropes. I cut my teeth there. Everything I learned there, I have used in my career, even to this day. So I had great training, but I started off as a chemical dependency counselor. That was my first job. I was in community college. I said, I don't know about going to college for a long time. I have to get a skill so I can have a job. And so 3 semesters in, I was able to become a certified alcohol and drug counselor. And then, I worked at Covenant House, and I moved into welfare to work. And then I moved into early childhood education, policy work. I've worked for a city. I've worked for the state. Worked for Superior Court of California. Worked for the United States District Court. And then I've done some other, like, sort of policy stuff on the side.
Right. Are you in school now as well? Because you have a lot of degrees. Are you
No, I'm
continuing?
done with school. But I work at schools. So I'm currently working at Cal State Northridge, which is my alma mater, Loyola Marymount University, and Pierce College. So I started working at Pierce College as an adjunct instructor in political science because of the background that I have. My degrees allow me to teach political science. And so I started there in 2005. So this year, June, I'm celebrating my 20th year as an instructor. I have taught continuously every single semester since 2005, since fall of '05.
Okay, wait a minute. So this is in addition to your day job,
Yeah.
right?
Because what I really
Wow.
felt
Okay.
was I had to be able to give back in the two communities that gave to me, right? So I knew that I had to work in child welfare, doing some kind of system work to improve conditions for kids. And then at the same time, education was the thing that compelled me and shot me into that world. So I was like, that's really important to me. And that was again where I felt seen, safest, valued, and I wanted to be able to give that back. And so I started off at Pierce, and then over the years I've been able to add other schools.
It's very good to feel wanted, right?
It is, and it's been great at LMU and at CSUN. I'm teaching classes like child maltreatment. I'm teaching folks to, in a peer support specialist certification program where paraprofessionals, folks with just lived experience can come in and say, hey, I have lived experience with all of these different things, experiencing homelessness, justice involvement, foster care involvement, mental health, substance use, and now I want to help affect change. And so, I asked the universe for the ability to be able to take all of this experience now, going on 3 decades of child welfare experience and higher ed experience and start to really impart it to the generation that'll come after me. I still have, probably 18, 19 more years to work before I retire, but I really want to help, prepare the folks that are coming behind us. We're in a time where we really just know so much more about how to do it better.
Are you hopeful that that's
I
going to
am. I
happen?
actually am. I think that the systems have come a long way from where they were in 1989 and even in 1995 when I left. I think we've made a lot of changes, in my career. I've seen the numbers go from serving 40,000 families in LA County to serving 20,000 families. When I started at DCFS, and I work in a section, the Youth Development Services section, where we create programs and support young people that, are exiting care. It was the program that I went through. It was where Jules worked. But even our program, when I started there 15 years ago, we were serving 10,000 kids a year. Now we're serving half. Not because we're working less, but because there are fewer kids that are languishing in care long enough to age out. And that's
Wow,
phenomenal.
that's good to
Yeah.
know.
I
Yeah,
love
that's
that. I
phenomenal.
love that I've been able to see the shift in, these extraordinarily high numbers of African American kids in care now being reduced, to much smaller numbers. I remember seeing 60% at times at the beginning of my career, and now we're at like a quarter.
Right, but we are not practicing blind removal here, right? Not
We
in Los
are
Angeles County, or is it
we're
something that's
piloting it.
instituted?
We've been piloting it for a couple years, and we have it in a few offices.
Oh,
But I
oh,
don't think
good.
it's
I
yet
didn't know
expanded
that. That's
across the
great.
whole of the department. But yeah, we have been doing blind removals and using that in our SDM, our structured decision making process, and it's promising, right? It really does yield a big difference in how we support families, and we're moving towards mandated supporting instead of reporting, which at least as I'm teaching it and as I'm seeing it in my little sphere of the world, where I am at work, I can see the shift. Right, there's a big shift.
Right, can you explain that to me? I've never heard that.
Historically we use that term mandated reporter, right? And we are required in certain fields. If you're a teacher, if you're working at a park, if you are at a
Or if you're
hospital,
CASA,
yeah, if
yep.
you're a CASA, our wonderful CASAs who I love,
Hmm.
if you're working in this field, we're required to report things, right? If we see things that can harm children, or when families are in need. And so there's been a shift over the past maybe like 2 years, we've seen changes legislatively. So at the state level, and also at our county level with the Board of Supervisors, adopting changes to that where we're now even changing the language to say we're not mandated reporters and mandated reporting, we're mandated supporters and supporting. And when you do that, language is super important. And I know people say like, oh, words are just words. No, words are really important. And when you think about it, if I'm required to report you, I'm telling on you, right? So, yeah, I'm calling to say something's wrong with these people.
Yep.
This is what's happening in this family. The simple shift of envisioning it as mandated supporting. If I'm a teacher and I have a family in my classroom that I'm seeing is struggling, right? I have a kiddo in my class and I'm interacting with that mom or dad as they come and get him, to envision me saying, how can I help? What can I do to assist? Who can I call to bring in to provide some additional help? That changes the dynamic. It changes the dynamic that might have been very oppositional between me and that parent when it was, I'm going to call somebody so they could come and tell you about yourself, right? I'm going to call somebody because I think you need an intervention versus how can I help, right? And this is what I've taught for years, right? Hey, our approach should always be, how can I help? Please share it with me. I want to listen. I want to learn. I want to know so I can figure out what I can do, right? It just changes the whole dynamic. And the hope is that we can cause us to start to respond differently to families. Now, there are some families, admittedly, like my own, that needed far more than just support. Even with supports, the dynamics in my family, I am positive, would not have changed. I think that there are some families that really do require a much deeper level of intervention. And in some instances, for that family to be together is almost impossible. I do think that there are families like that. And that's because of prolonged multi-generational issues create that type of family. But I think the vast majority of people that we encounter in child protective services, even across the nation, really just need a helping hand in the moment.
Yeah, I really also feel that way. What I've seen is that, and I've talked about this with other people on the podcast. If we supported the families better, there would be less kids in care.
Absolutely.
That's it.
If you're talking about a family where, again, a parent really has limited bandwidth because they were not parented well, why do we not have a society that responds to that by saying, I'm going to provide some information about how you do that? My kids went to, and so again, like you had said earlier, like I don't take a lot of credit. I had a lot of help. I had a lot of help. When my kids were in preschool, they went to a preschool that was accredited by the National Association for the Education of Young Children, which was very important to me, right? That the school they went to was NAEYC accredited. Because I was a nerd, because I was at school, because I had taken classes and I had learned that is the gold standard. I looked for that, for my kids. And part of that was that we had peer mentors. We had workshops every month on different issues around parenting preschool age kids. And I felt safe. I felt like I could go to teachers and say, my daughter doesn't eat anything that I pack for lunch. Am I doing something wrong? My daughter hasn't been potty trained yet. Can I get some help? Right? Like I could go to them and I knew that they weren't going to call somebody on me, that they weren't going to say, oh, you're an awful mom. They were there to listen and to help. I continued to have those experiences and those kind of people around me. Had I not, I don't know that I would have been any different than, the experience that I had with my parents, because everybody who's parenting needs that, right? And some of us are lucky that we can call our mom, that we can call our grandma, that we can call our aunties, that we can call cousins, whoever it is. And then there are those of us for whom that's just not the reality. And we still are deserving of having community step up. It's why Peace for Kids is so important to me, with the mantra of community is family, right? Like that resonated with me so deeply the first day that I encountered Zaid and, the cohort of kids that I started working with and getting to know and being in relationship with. And so, I think that we owe that to each other just as human beings. And if we did that, families that had needs could have those needs addressed, remediated, and they could continue on with their life, right? People lose jobs. People get sad. People lose people in their family and, reel from that, right? From losing those relationships. People get divorced. People sometimes drink too much, right? People do things all the time that don't necessarily result in their kids being put into foster care. But those are fortunate people that have more resources around them, more supports around them, maybe less visibility around them. There are certain communities that are obviously more susceptible, more scrutinized and under the microscope than others. And again, there's a huge segment of our society, I think, that really need the extra help and the extra resourcing that we don't have built in around us already. I don't know. That's important to me because I was very fortunate.
Right. You've broken the cycle,
Yeah,
actually.
but because I had a lot of people, I think, that believed in me and caused me to believe in myself. I was also propelled by fear. So because I knew what it was like to be alone, to be homeless, to be hungry, to really be hopeless, I just wanted to never experience that again. And that's what drove me to keep going to school, keep, working, despite exhaustion, despite being overextended, whatever it was. I was like, I can't have that experience again. And I surely can't have my kids experience that. And so, as much as people will say, wow, you're amazing and you're all these things, I'm like, no, you're just talking to somebody who spent most of their life terrified. And that's the reality. If I would have tripped, if I would have fallen too heavily on my own safety net that I was holding, I wouldn't be here. My kids wouldn't be where they are, right? Because I really was always on the edge, right? Of just being able to subsist. and I didn't give up. And I think that's the key. Man, nobody else is going to believe in you like you believe in you. Nobody else is going to fight for you harder than you're going to fight for you.
Right. So is that your message now to kids who might be listening to this?
I always, I think you have to believe in you, even if nobody else does. And it's enough. It is. And it's contagious. Because when you believe in you, other people start to at least take notice and say, well, why? Why should I? Right. And that's helped me. It hasn't been easy. A lot of times I was faking the funk and I really didn't believe in myself, but I pretended that I did. It took me a really long time to really be able to say, oh yeah, I do. Hey, I'm pretty great. Like I actually really like who I am.
I think you're pretty great, Jenny.
Oh, thank you. But I've also had to do a lot of work, and so that's the other part of the message to kids that have experienced a lot of the stuff that I have is it's not easy. You've got to do the work.
Okay, so I know you love to learn, you love to read. Yeah. So do you love to write? Are you writing a book? Are you writing a movie? Are you writing No?
People ask me that all the time. I'd love to, but I don't know if I have time. Because I'm always doing a lot of stuff.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can do it. You can do it.
That would be kind of cool. I don't know. We'll see.
Okay, she's saying it right now. Everybody hear this? She's thinking about writing a book.
That would actually be really cool. Then I'd have something to do, something new to do.
I want to ask you one last question, and I ask all my guests this. What is the one thing that no one would ever know about you unless you told them?
I always present myself in this way that I think people, would perceive as being sort of hard, very serious. And people that are very close to me, they always go, oh my gosh, that is a front. You are a marshmallow. You cry at anything. My kids, we watch movies and I'm over there like, we're watching 911 or like just real simple shows and I'm over there in tears. I'm like the world's worst I cry for everything. Anything I see.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would really guess that because you do present so solid up front, like so professional, so well-spoken, so contained, so controlled, so on. But you're saying no, actually, that
I'm a big crier. I'm super sensitive. I'm super soft. And I think I'm just now coming into that. My kids would say it's my soft girl era.
That
Yeah,
you're a
but
marshmallow.
I'm a marshmallow.
I love it.
And I love that.
Maybe that's the title of your book.
Yeah, we'll see.
Listen, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast. You're
Oh
the
my
bomb.
gosh. Well, this was my pleasure. I loved it. I love speaking with you. And I hope maybe there's a little nugget in there for somebody.
Oh, I know. I'm sure, Miss Marshmallow. All right. Take care, my dear.
Thank you so much.
Jenny, thank you so much for coming to chat with us. You know, one thing that really stuck with me was what you said about the chaos and violence in your home as a child. You didn't know how to interpret it, but you learned how to navigate within it. That's survival. Fortunately, there were resources that you could utilize, and you were motivated to reach higher and get a good education. Again, it was all about survival. You recognized that you didn't have the bandwidth for social work and that you did for education admin, and had the desire to develop programs to help others. You've always been an advocate. You did what you were good at. Again, survival. What gets repeated again and again as we interview people is that it's all about education, about being informed, not just for the kids, but particularly the parents. We have to eliminate the shame that parents have when they recognize that they're out of their depth and need help. There are programs that provide for those that have needs, and they can have those needs met. So thank you for that. You're an incredible resource and clearly a great teacher. Please hit the subscribe button so you can be informed when the next episode drops. Thanks so much, and be well. If you or someone you know is harming themselves or thinking about harming themselves, go to crisistextline.org. If you see something, say something. If you suspect a child's health or safety is jeopardized in any way by parents or anyone else, contact the Child Protective Services Agency in your county. 24-hour hotlines are staffed by trained social workers who will help you through the process, and you can do so anonymously. In California, you can call the Child Protection Hotline at 800-540-4000. So if you see something, say something. You might be saving a child's life. If you want to know more about becoming a CASA anywhere in the country, go to nationalcasagal.org, and in LA, casala.org. And if you want to know more about becoming a foster parent, check out the National Foster Parent Association at nfponline.org. There's also faithfosterfamilies.org and adoptuskids.org. There's tons of other information online as well, so you can just hunt around. We also want to thank the supremely talented Christina Apostolopoulos for her beautiful original music. You can find her music on Spotify or Instagram at Christina Aposto. And also thank you to Yukon Har for his engineering. Thanks for listening, and if you like what you hear and you find it as valuable as we do, please rate us and hit subscribe. You can also make a donation at bonusbabies.org. See you next time.